Perfect. Thanks, Sarah. Yep, so welcome everyone to our second chapter chat for fall 2021. The focus of today will be on project management and project documentation. So those will be the two big things that we'll be going over, and then we'll also have a lot of room, as per usual in chapter chats, for other discussions on both those topics and any other questions around those topics that have come up for your chapters. So just to recap, we'll start off with our usual welcome before going into project management, and then project documentation, which will mostly consist of a demo of our project database and an overview of why that's useful and why that's valuable for you and your chapters. And then we'll end with that open discussion that I mentioned. So just as a reminder, here's your chapter relations team. So here are all of your different chapter relations coordinators for each of your regions. You can reach out to us at any point with any questions. It doesn't have to be about the topic of today's chat. It can be about anything related to your chapter. And you should be having your first check-in call around this time of year with your CRC. So you should be hearing from them soon if you haven't already. The goal, like I said before, is really to have an open forum and open discussion. So feel free to jump in with any questions at any point or comments related to your chapter or other experiences you've had. And again, this is our second chapter chat, so we'll have another one in November with a focus on community partnership. Are there any questions before we start, or can we jump into project management? Okay, so I'll turn it over to Matthew and Josh on project management.
Yep, that sounds good. I'll kind of get started off, and then I'll pass it off to Josh when we get kind of into it. So we came up with a sort of visual diagram to help chapters come up with new projects, what the best kind of steps to take is, a nice little flow chart of, and once you complete this step, here's what you should look to do next. If not, here's different routes and options you can go. So let's say from the very beginning, we start in the top left at the pink starting block. Your ESW chapter has the resource to begin a project. You're starting to want to look at creating projects for your students or something on campus. So the first step in that is, do you have a project idea? Do you have something, that has a need? Do you, did you come up with something? Did you see something cool and you want to do it? If so, you can start to identify partners on campus or off. Is it going to be a school project? Is it something for, a local elementary? Something along those lines. But say you don't have a project idea, but you want to create one. That's totally fine, and that's what we're here for. A great resource that we have is the project database, which we'll go into a little bit of detail later on in this meeting. But with that, you can have kind of just a big brainstorming event, scroll through the project database. There's tons and tons of projects on there with a lot of different categories and different, accessibility categories in there too that you can kind of check out and see what works best for you guys. Reaching out to different professors. Maybe some professors have projects that they're looking to get started off the ground. They just need students to start working with it, or just local organizations around your city or around the university of needs they might have, which kind of leads into that next step. Does your project idea solve a need? Yes, move on, no, kind of get restarted onto that. So once you kind of have your project idea and who you might want to work with, you need to look for a dedicated project leader. That may be yourself as chapter president. That may be someone who really wants to spearhead the idea and you can count on for, constant communication. If you don't have one, start to look. It might be someone, in the exec board. It might be someone who approaches you. It might be something you have to reach out to certain members who've been really involved lately. And if so, then, you can kind of move on to start to initiate the new project. Let us know. You can talk to your CRC if you have any questions and go on from there. Once you kind of have your idea, your main leader, you kind of get your project group assembled, reach out to student members, reach out to different students in different engineering classes. And then you can actually begin to form the idea and do some real research into the project to determine feasibility. So develop design requirements and conduct some preliminary research on your topic. Has it been done in the past? What are some issues other people have run into? What do you want to achieve? And come up with a mission statement of what does this project achieving and what should it do? And then come up with a nice project summary, a project title, who you might be working with, the overview, background, for, more, as the project develops over the years, you have a clear, goal of what the project started out to be, as well as being able to market it to other students and other grants and things like that. And then from there, you can kind of create the new project in the database. And then from there, I'll toss it on to Josh, and he can kind of dig more into the rest of the flowchart here.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so you will see throughout this whole diagram, we mentioned the product database a lot. That's something that Emma said we're going to dive more into. So we're really trying to push that as a great management tool to kind of keep us in the loop of where you're at, and also help you and your project keep yourselves on track. So when you create that new project in the database, that's kind of when that kicks off. You're saying, okay, we're going into this project full force. We're going to give it our all, and we're going to proceed with doing taking the necessary steps to complete a project. So that's when you want to start to develop some preliminary designs of whatever you're doing, whether it's something physical or something like an app. Once you get those design requirements and you want to create your budget, it doesn't have to be anything typically too fine, just kind of a base budget of your larger components, add a safety factor in there of a couple bucks, and then get just kind of an overview of what you need to spend for your project, because that's 9 times out of 10, that's definitely not going to be the final number. It's just a good reference point. So once you get your budget, you want to narrow down on your final design of your project, and then identify if you have the proper funds for that project and for your design that you want to create. So it'll take a little refining of the budget. You'll talk with your group of, is this something that we can do with the funds we're given, or the funds that we have in our chapter of ESW? If it is not, you want to seek some fundraising opportunities. So that's also where your chapter relations coordinator can come in handy, talking about fundraisers, applying for grants. As ESW, we offer project grants, and then also seek sponsorship. So local businesses, local engineering firms that might sponsor your project to help you purchase parts, materials. So you, as a group, you can construct that, which goes on to the next part. Once you obtain those funds, you want to purchase that material and equipment. Move on to assembling the project. Once that material equipment comes in, test it, make your necessary adjustments, make sure that your end product is, or your end project is what you are kind of envision in the future. And if it's not, go back in that project database and update lessons learned, and what deviated in that, because those are always good learning experiences for the chapter, or for your project group, the chapter, and then other chapters of ESW around America as well. So thinking back to that mission, statement, why, your need that you solved. So why did you create this project? What was its intended use? So that's kind of the final step here, is implementing this project into whatever need you're trying to solve, and then finally updating the project database as a completed project, sharing all sorts of pictures, and generating some hype in the chat, as we like to say. So when creating this flow diagram, it's meant to be a reference point, not taken for verbatim, but if you and your project team are going through a project and planning it or executing it, refer back to this document and kind of see where you're at, look at the steps to the right, steps to the left of that, and see what you kind of need to focus on. It's not meant to be an A, B, C, D, but more of a kind of a fluid diagram to kind of help you narrow in and guide you where you need to go. So with that, does anybody have any questions on this project management flow diagram? Take that as a no, but yeah, and as CRCs, we're always happy to help guide you in those steps. So if you working on a project, you want to reach out to one of us and just say, hey, this is a project, here's where we're at, kind of need some help on going forward, we are definitely happy to do that for you.
Awesome, thank you both. And a good call out also on fundraising and budgeting. And that was actually the topic of our most recent chapter chat about a month ago. So if there are any questions or looking for inspiration there, that's a good resource out on YouTube as a recording. And then there's also a recap sent via email. So if there are any, questions on that, that's a resource. Plus you can ask your CRC, as Josh mentioned as well. Awesome. So if there are no questions, we can move on to the next section. But I guess before we move on, are there any comments or any other thoughts from any of the CRCs online about things they've heard from their chapters or things that they found helpful if they were also in student chapters?
Oh yeah, one other thing I will mention too, running back up to the brainstorming blocks, looking at a project leader. I know I've found it helpful in the projects I have done as a president of ESW at the University of Akron. I would just say, don't be afraid to kind of ask somebody to be a project leader. A lot of people sometimes aren't keen to stepping up, even though they have the necessary talents and skills to lead a project. And also it's a great learning experience. So definitely don't be hesitant or afraid to ask somebody to step up and lead a project.
Awesome. Great. So obviously, with this flowchart, project database is a really key part of that. So that's what we'll now transition to in the second half of our chat. So moving along to the next section, I'll turn it over to Sarah to cover a little bit about documentation, why it's important, and then more specifically, how the project database can help you at those different stages of your project lifecycle.
Yep, thanks. So as you're thinking about that flowchart and you're thinking about working on a new project or an existing project, documenting your process is really key in the success of the project, especially at that beginning stage when you're figuring out sort of why you want to do a project and what the goals of the project are. Making sure you write those down and you think about what metrics will make the project a success, what you're looking for, and anytime you're working on a design, sort of having the documentation of why you picked what you picked, how certain you were about different parameters. All of those things can be really helpful if if something goes wrong, you sort of have a good place of like where to start. And you're like, oh, well, we weren't sure about this. That was a little bit more of a guess and check versus like this, we calculated, we know for the fact this was the right thing to do. It's also really helpful, as many of you know, students graduate or have other activities that they might prioritize. And if you have a change in leadership or a break, a semester where you can't work physically on a project, having your process and your goals and your ideas documented is really helpful in sort of picking up where you left off and continuing the project. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about sort of what that might look like when you're working on a project, making sure that you document who's working on the project, when you're working on the project, like what the timeline of the project is, your objectives, as I mentioned, like the metrics of like what would make the project a success, sort of why you're working on the project, your motivation, and then sort of what your process looks like. Is this something where you are, creating a prototype out of CAD first? Is this something that you're going to do all the planning and do, build with a large group of people, like a build day? Is this iterative? Are you dividing into two teams and working separately on two different aspects of the project? All of that type of stuff is really helpful to have written down. And then also really key are the materials you're using, the costs, your budget, where you're getting the money from, you know, anything that's involved in the creation of your project is key to document. And then, you know, as you go, like challenges that come up, things that you have questions about that you want to do more research on, successes, anything like that is a good thing to document. And documentation should take the form of both writing, like written documentation, and photos, or sketches, or, you know, CAD drawings, all of those types of things that really help people visualize. A lot of engineering projects, you know, it's one thing to write, you know, the wind turbine blade in this configuration, but it's a lot easier if you then have a picture next to it. And different chapters will structure sort of how they do documentation. Some teams, like, it's very informal or up to the team lead of the project. Other chapters, you know, will have like very set project reports that need to be done at the end of every semester. And that can be up to you and your chapter, sort of how you want to structure it. If you are a chapter that works in multiple projects, if you want to standardize sort of some of that. But one of the key things that will be helpful is the project database. So I'm going to show you what that looks like, how to use it. Let me just share my screen. And while I'm doing that, does anyone have questions before we go into project database? No. Okay. If you do have questions, just unmute and ask. You know, this is meant to be for you guys. So this is the project database. This is the homepage once you log in. Creating an account is really easy. It is free. The key thing is that in order to create a chapter, you need to have been added as a chapter leader. And anyone who is a chapter leader or an admin can do that. So if your chapter has, you know, you can have like one login for your chapter, and then it's really easy. You can ask your CRC, you can ask me, you can post in Slack, hey, I'd like to be a chapter lead. And I also will frequently go through just the members and add people on a regular basis. So this is what you see when you log in. You'll note that sort of recent edits, like new projects, wiki pages that were added, will show up here. There are some key links to our website if you have questions on different programs that help with projects. And then the really key page is to come to projects. And this is alphabetical, but this is a really great way to see what chapters are working on, get ideas, sort of figure out what makes sense. If you're working on a project and you're wondering if there's somebody else you can reach out to, you can always come in and say, oh, this is who the lead is. You can click on them, you can get their email, you can reach out to them. Depending on the project, sometimes you can see a lot more about the project. I can come to activity here and you can see sort of all of the recent changes. So Northwestern has been updating a lot of their wiki on their aquaponics project. And this is a really good project to see, you know, you can see the chapter, the primary contact, the fact that this is in progress. They started this in the spring. This is a project that's under the project grants program. So they have received money from ESW in order to work on this project. the scope is their school. They think it'll take 2 years to complete. You can see other funding sources and project costs. So if you were thinking, hey, we want to do an aquaponics project, you know, what might that look like? What might that need? What funding, you know, do we need to think about? This is a really good place to start. And then you can see sort of their goals. And this is one of those things where you can use the project database as much or as little as you want. So as long as you have a title and some basic information, you've created a project. But you can also use this to track issues and create a Gantt chart. I can show you what that looks like on chapters who has done it. You can add blog posts and post updates. This allows you to add, you know, videos and pictures and much more information than just like the standard homepage. This can be done, you know, as a wiki, so you can have different pages. You can upload files. So when we talk about documentation, this is a really great way to document. You know, this shows lots of pictures. This has CAD files. And this also acts as a GitHub repository. Yeah, I didn't think there was anything there. So when you want to create a new project, there are a few different ways you can get there. You can create a new project from here or here on the home page, or if you're on the projects tab, you can create a new project here or here as well. And when you do that, we'd like you to name this as chapter name, project name. You can put in a description. The goal of this project is to inform students on how to document projects. If you have a website for your chapter or somewhere else that you're putting information about this, you can add that here. Obviously, that's not required. If this is a sub-project from something else you've worked on, like I might put this as a sub-project to chapter project documentation, and then could inherit all of those members. I'm going to assign this to myself as to my chapter. I thought we had an HQ chapter on here. We do not. I'll just put it as my alma mater. Put my contact info. Oh, this is my name. This is my email, which will now be up on YouTube for everyone to see. Yay. This project is in progress and we're starting it in the fall of 2021, which, note to self, we need to update that. This is something that we are regularly updating. So if you see any issues like this, like please just contact your CRC, post in, you know, project database channel on Slack, let us know. We would like this to be as useful for everyone as possible. And this is an educational project. It's not under any specific program. We have chapters internationally. This cost is 0. This is with SW HQ, with chapters. So not too much you have to fill out. This is the section where you can sort of choose sort of what aspects of the database you want. I'm going to, for example, add a blog post. If you wanted to have Gantt charts, if you wanted to have issue tracking, you can add issue tracking or a calendar. I'm going to click create. Oh, here we go. And now this shows that you've successfully created your project. And once you've done that, you can add members. This shows everyone who has an account. Some of them were imported from our databases, which is why their names look a little bit funny. So for example, I could add Josh, who was just speaking about project management, and say that he is a chapter lead on this project and add him here. If you want to track sort of set milestones, you know, you can say, oh, this is an open, you know, checkpoint that we're working towards. I can say, oh, I would have to create new. Anyway, that's an aspect that you can use. You're not required to. Similarly, you can create issue categories. This might be, you know, reaching all chapters. You can assign it to anyone who is in your membership, I think. And then you can create wikis. The key thing here is that to create a page, you can do that from your settings. But if you actually want to add to the wiki, you come up to the wiki tab. And as you go, you can always come back to settings and edit this. You know, if I were to finish this, I can come here and say completed. And then I can come here and add today. As the completion date. And then just click save. So this is your project on the project database. You can create blog posts. This is the best way to add updates. I found it's a little easier to use than the wiki and to read as well. But you can feel free to use this however you see fit. You can upload meeting minutes, project reports. You can upload pictures. And you can start discussions if you would like, and you can add to other chapters, projects, discussion forums. This is really meant to be helping you guys and to create a sort of outward facing image and list of all of the projects that ESW as a whole has been working on, is working on, has completed. So, you know, yes, it is a requirement for your chapter to create a project, to add a description, to fill out sort of, you know, the key details in that create a project tab. But then it's up to you if this is something that's helpful for your chapter to use for project documentation, then please do. If you would like to do it in a different way, if you have a Google Drive, if you know, don't think that this is the most helpful, then that's okay as well. It's really just, you know, how documentation should be helpful for your chapter. So you should find a system and find a way to document that is best for your chapter, for your project. Just make sure that everyone knows how to find it, or else the documentation isn't as helpful as you would like. We definitely had that. We had a group that created what we called the solar kiosk, and it was very similar to what a fair number of chapters have done with like a solar smoothie cart, but we had set it up with a laptop screen and used it for like tabling. We would sometimes like use it to pass out popsicles on a hot day, and also to table about events and projects and, you know, recruit new members. And there were like very set ways that you had to plug in different cords, and we had to reach out to chapter members who had graduated, which took a while, because they left a document that said, you know, how to use the solar kiosk, but it was an unfinished document, and there were plenty of questions involved. So, you know, documenting your work and having things, another form of documentation, a user manual, very helpful. You know, how to troubleshoot this, always a good thing. Where to find these pieces that we left over the summer in a random classroom. All of that is a really good thing to document. And I have now been talking for a while. So if you have any questions, please let me know. If there's anything in the project database you are curious about, if you have questions about sort of what the best way to document different types of things in your project are. Also, if you have, you know, have a system that you like that I haven't mentioned, like, feel free to share.
I just have a comment on the database in general, but as we grow the database and as an organization, as we all use it, this is like our network forum. So the more we use it, the more we add to it, and the more detailed and the broader our projects get, the better it'll be. So it is sort of a big group project, this database, and I hope that you all are able to take advantage of it to its fullest extent.
With the accounts too, Sarah, we encourage chapters to have one account per chapter, right? That's kind of the recommendation there.
That is, I think, the easiest way to do it, and just to have a shared login instead of having to add every individual person. But also, like, if it's, you know, easier to add everyone, that's fine as well. It just, yeah, you would have to then be careful to make sure that you add people with the right permission. So having one shared login is probably the easiest way to do it.
Awesome. And just anecdotally too, I've actually used this a few times because I've had chapters approach me about wanting to do a new project about you know, different topics like aquaponics or similar. And so when looking for other resources or other contacts, this has been like a very quick way to just check and see if we've had similar work done in other chapters or elsewhere. So I've found it pretty helpful, especially the search function, which you're showing right now.
Yep, I realized that one of the key functions of a database is searchability. And so what better way to show that than to search through projects that might be similar to what you're working on.
Awesome. And we have a comment in the chat. Could we get a link to the database website? Yes, great question. Sarah's on it, going to beat me to it, but it will also be in the slides that will be shared as part of this recap along with the recording link. So the overview Sarah gave will be there, and so will that link to the database itself.
Yep. There's also a link to it in the resources page of our website. So if you come to ESW Global, resources, it's right here.
Awesome. It looked like we had some instructions posted right next to it too, which is a good reminder for making the account. And then once you have the account, then, how do you create a project and go from there?
Yep. And if you're on the database, we have a project called Chapter Project Documentation. Very original name. And that document can be found right here.
Awesome. Are there any other questions, comments? I see a reaction on someone's video, which is awesome. But any other questions or comments on this topic or the database itself?
And so this is if you're using issue tracking. Harvey Mudd and Rose Holman have added their issues and dates. So you can see that in this format. I would say there's a lot to play around with, and you can always delete a test page if you want to just say, oh, how does this work? I do highly recommend hopping into the database, editing your projects, adding your projects, seeing what's available, figuring out if this is helpful for your chapter in your documentation process. And I just want to reiterate that as you go through that, if any questions come up, please reach out to your CRC, reach out to me, post questions in the Slack. We want this to be as easy and helpful as possible.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. That was actually the last major topic today, so I think we can kind of switch over to the open discussion, so I won't flash the slides back up there. But just thinking about what we spoke about. So number one, project management, and then we went through the flow chart with Matthew and Josh, and then number two, project documentation with a focus on the project database. Are there any questions on this or anything else that kind of was sparked by what we were talking about? Any last advice from CRCs, former student leaders, current student leads? Awesome. It's that Tuesday, Monday feeling that we all have. Awesome. So we can probably wrap a little bit early if there are no kind of further questions or discussion items. We will have another chapter chat, our third one of the semester in November. So that one will be on community partnerships. And again, the link to the recording and then also the slides will be shared out as a follow-up. But thank you all for joining. And thank you everyone for participating and sharing during the call.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.